You look more like a chicken sandwich guy anyway." The laughter that followed cracked through the first-class cabin like turbulence. She said it loud enough for the whole row to hear, a smirk balanced perfectly under her polished smile. The flight attendant's badge gleamed under the cabin light as she placed a tray in front of him, white bread, a dry piece of fish, and a glass of lukewarm water. Across the aisle, a group of men in suits burst out laughing, forks tapping their plates like applause. Cameras of smartphones tilted discreetly, pretending not to film but catching everything. And him? He did not move. He did not flinch. He just stared at the tray, then at her, calm. Silent. A red blazer against a sea of navy suits. The kind of silence that does not bow, it calculates. Before we go any deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever been humiliated in a place where you paid to be respected? Stay right here, because 5 minutes from now, this same man will order an entire flight crew out of the sky. Now, let us rewind to how that moment began. It was Flight 326 from New York to Los Angeles, a clear afternoon above the clouds. The first-class cabin was cool, quiet, wrapped in the soft hum of privilege. Every seat came with champagne, silver cutlery, and a kind of invisible hierarchy that everyone understood without saying a word. When he boarded, dark skin, trimmed beard, no tie, just that sharp red blazer, people noticed. They did not stare long, but their eyes said enough. He looked out of place, too casual for comfort, too confident for the label they wanted to give him. He placed his phone face down, adjusted his seat, and waited. The attendant, Nicole, appeared moments later with that smile that had served her for 10 years. But something about him rubbed her wrong, his calm, maybe, or the way he did not rush to prove he belonged. "Sir, the chicken or the halibut?" she asked. "I ordered the halibut," he said. Her laugh was light, but sharp at the edges. "You? I think the chicken sandwich fits you better." She turned, motioned to the galley, and came back with that plate. The wrong one. The one that said, "You are lucky to be here at all." He looked at her, then at the men across the aisle still chuckling. "You think that is funny?" he asked quietly. "No, sir," she replied, still smiling. "Just trying to make sure everyone gets what fits." The seatbelt sign chimed overhead. The air changed. The man picked up his phone, pressed one number, and said with surgical calm, "Rachel, fire here. Now." No one laughed after that. The hum of the engines suddenly sounded like judgment. The cabin had no idea what was about to happen, but the sky was about to witness it. The engines hummed low, steady, like a sleeping beast beneath the cabin floor. First class glowed in that soft, expensive light that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. Champagne glasses winked from every tray table. White linen napkins were folded like origami swans. And in seat 3 amperes, the man in the red blazer sat perfectly still, his phone now face down beside the untouched plate. No one spoke directly to him, not yet, but glances bounced around like tiny sparks of static. A woman 2 rows ahead whispered something to her husband. He turned, looked, and nodded, just a flicker of recognition followed by judgment. The kind of look that says you do not belong here without ever using the words. Flight attendant Nicole kept moving through the aisle, her polished smile stitched back into place. She poured wine for the men in suits who had laughed earlier. They thanked her by name. She laughed back, easy, confident again. But every few minutes, her eyes darted toward him just long enough to check if he was watching. He was not. He was thinking. He was remembering. At 31, Marcus Reed had built a technology company that reshaped corporate logistics across 3 continents. At 33, he took his first flight in first class. The attendant that day had refused to hang his jacket. "We reserved the closet for premium members," she said. He had nodded, folded his jacket on his lap, and said nothing. The humiliation stayed with him not because it hurt, but because it was routine. Now, 15 years later, it had found him again. Same tone, same smile, same message. Across the aisle, the laughter had softened into gossip. One of the men leaned forward, voice low but not low enough. Whole red suit, gold watch, cheap phone case, probably some influencer. They let anybody in here now. His companion chuckled. He looked at that tray like he has not seen fish before. Marcus heard every word. The air seemed thinner now, like the oxygen had decided to take sides. The junior attendant, a young woman named Claire, lingered near the galley door. She had seen everything. She had seen Nicole make the switch, the halibut for the sandwich. She had seen the smirk. She had seen the phone's recording. And now she stood frozen between loyalty and conscience. Nicole walked by again, stopping near Marcus's row. "Is everything all right with your meal, sir?" Her voice was syrup sweet. Marcus looked up slowly. "Do you ask that question to everyone?" he said. She blinked, the practiced hospitality faltering for just a moment. "Of course, sir." He gestured toward the tray. "Then why is this the only one that looks like a school lunch?" A couple of passengers chuckled under their breath, pretending not to listen but listening hard. Nicole's smile thinned. "Perhaps there was a mix-up," she said. "There was not," Marcus replied quietly. "You made a choice." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Nicole adjusted her posture, stepped back, and gave a small laugh. "I am sorry if you took it the wrong way." He nodded once. "You will be." She turned away quickly, hiding the tremor in her hand as she poured another glass of wine. Claire looked at her supervisor, then at Marcus, then back again. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell the truth. But fear pressed against her ribs like a seatbelt locked too tight. Marcus leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes for a second, and exhaled slowly. The rhythm of the cabin returned: forks, glasses, the low whine of altitude. Yet under it all, there was an unease. In the cockpit, Captain Lewis adjusted his headset. "Cabin ready?" he asked through the intercom. Nicole's voice came back, clipped but steady. "Cabin secure." As the plane leveled off, the announcement tone chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at cruising altitude. Meal service will continue shortly." The irony hit him like a note only he could hear. Meal service. He reached for his phone again. Not to call, not yet. Just to open the live flight map glowing on the screen. A small blue dot crossing the country, calm and steady, unaware that justice was sitting in seat 3 amperes, waiting for its cue. Claire approached timidly. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Sir, I saw what happened." That was not right. Marcus opened his eyes. "Your name?" "Claire, Seer." "You spoke up once today, Claire. That already makes you braver than most." She glanced over her shoulder. Nicole was watching from the galley, arms folded, lips tight. Claire lowered her voice again. "They think you are—" He finished the sentence for her. "Less." She nodded, ashamed. He gave a small nod. "Do not apologize for what you did not do." Then he picked up his napkin, wiped his hands, and said softly, almost to himself, 5 minutes. Claire frowned. 5 minutes for what? Marcus's gaze fixed on the aisle ahead. For them to realize whose sky they are standing in. The camera in every imagination would hold on his face then, the calm before the turn. The hum of the engines deepened, a storm forming somewhere inside the quiet. The plane cut through a pocket of air, just enough to shake the glasses on the trays, and Nicole, for the first time since takeoff, looked uneasy without knowing why. 5 minutes. That was all it would take. At 31,000 feet, the light in the first-class cabin turned golden, soft against the leather seats and silver trim. The hum of the engines was constant, like a low heartbeat pulsing through the floor. But beneath that calm, a new kind of silence had taken root tight, charged, watching. Marcus Reed sat still, his hand resting on the armrest, his phone once again face down beside the tray. Around him, luxury had become camouflage. Every detail of the cabin, the stitched upholstery, the scent of citrus polish, the faint jazz from the speakers was designed to make people feel important. Yet the feeling in the air was not importance. It was tension. Nicole poured champagne for the couple in seat 2B. She laughed, but the sound was forced now. Every time she turned, she could feel the weight of his calm pressing against her. Not loud, not confrontational, just there, like a storm she did not know how to measure. Claire moved carefully down the aisle collecting trays. Her hands trembled. She tried to stay invisible, but the truth she carried made her visible in a different way. She had seen what Nicole did, and she knew what it meant. It was not just about food. It was about boundaries, who was allowed comfort and who was merely allowed presence. When Claire reached Marcus's row, he looked up. His eyes were steady, unreadable, the kind of gaze that could make a lie trip over itself. "You can leave it," he said softly. "Yes, sir." Her voice cracked slightly. She wanted to say more, to warn him, to apologize for someone else's cruelty, but her throat locked up, he noticed. "You have worked here long?" 6 months, sir." That is long enough to know what silence costs," he said. Claire swallowed. "It costs everything." He gave a small nod. Then do not spend it on fear. She froze, her breath catching at the weight of his words. They did not sound like advice. They sounded like instruction. From across the cabin, one of the men who had mocked him earlier leaned over and whispered to another. "He is talking like a professor. I told you, some motivational guy." The other laughed under his breath. "Or a preacher. Either way, he is in the wrong pulpit." Nicole heard them and smirked, her confidence slowly returning as she gathered strength from their quiet approval. She turned toward Marcus again. "Sir, if there is anything else you need, please let me know." He looked at her, calm but deliberate. "I will." The tone in his voice made her hesitate. She had no idea why those two words felt like a warning. He lifted his phone and opened a document, his itinerary, his meeting schedule, the board meeting waiting for him in Los Angeles. The logo at the top of the screen glowed faintly, Skyline Air Group. He stared at the logo for a moment, his reflection faint in the glass. It was a company he had built piece by piece, after buying out two struggling regional airlines and merging them into one. 5 years of work, hundreds of employees. And still, even in the air he owned, people like Nicole could not see him for what he was. He remembered the first time he realized how deep it went. It was 12 years earlier at a conference in Denver. He had presented a proposal that would change the way cargo routes were optimized. Afterward, a senior investor patted him on the shoulder and said, "You talk well for someone from where you come from." The words had stung not because they were cruel, but because they were confident. That same confidence was sitting across the aisle right now, drinking champagne, laughing softly, thinking power had a color. He tapped his phone once, sending a silent signal to his assistant. A message flashed briefly on the screen before he turned it over again. "Prepare Protocol 7, Boarding ID 2461." Nicole leaned over the service counter in the galley, whispering to another attendant, "Brian, he is making people uncomfortable. Maybe we should move him to business class. Say it is for safety or balance." Brian frowned. "He paid for first class. You cannot just—" She cut him off. "I know how this goes. I have seen his type before. Loud, entitled, looking for a scene." Brian hesitated. "He has not said much, actually." "Exactly," Nicole replied. "The quiet ones are the ones who explode later." Claire, standing nearby, heard every word. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "He has not done anything wrong," she said quietly. Nicole turned, eyes sharp. "Claire, I have been doing this for 10 years. I know trouble when I see it." "That is not trouble," Claire whispered. "That is dignity." Nicole's face hardened. "You are overstepping." Claire met her gaze. "And you are underestimating." The tension between them hung heavy for a beat too long. Passengers were starting to sense something. One woman in row 4 shifted uncomfortably. Another man stopped reading his newspaper. The cabin had changed temperature, slightly colder, slightly charged. Marcus opened his eyes again. He did not need to hear the words to know what was happening. He could feel it. Bias has a sound. It hums under the polite voices and practiced smiles, quiet but constant. He looked out the window. Clouds rolled beneath them like a sea of white marble. His reflection hovered faintly in the glass, calm, composed, patient. But behind that stillness was calculation. He tapped his phone again, twice. A soft vibration confirmed the signal had been received. Somewhere on the ground, in the airline's corporate office, an internal log began to update. Every word said in the last 15 minutes. Every name, every passenger manifest, every camera feed, logged and recorded. Claire looked toward him, a question in her eyes. He gave her the smallest nod, almost invisible. And then, as if the sky itself sensed the shift, the plane hit a small pocket of turbulence. Glasses rattled. Nicole stumbled, catching herself on the counter. She exhaled sharply, pretending to laugh. Marcus did not move. He simply said, almost to the air itself, "That is the sound of balance returning." No one understood what he meant. Not yet. But 5 minutes later, they would. The plane steadied again, cutting through the afternoon air over the Midwest. From the outside, everything looked calm blue sky, white clouds, sunlight spilling across the wing. But inside the cabin, that calm had turned into pressure, invisible and waiting. Nicole adjusted her uniform jacket and drew a breath through her teeth. Her hands still trembled slightly from the turbulence, but it was not the air that rattled her. It was the man in seat 3 amperes, the one who had not raised his voice. Not once, yet somehow managed to shift the gravity of the entire room. She leaned into the galley, whispering again to Brian. He is watching me, I can feel it. Brian shrugged. He is literally just sitting there. Exactly, she said. It is a performance. Silence is a performance. Brian frowned, glancing toward the cabin. Marcus was reading something on his tablet now, calm as a mountain. His jawline tight, his posture effortless. It was the kind of poise people mistake for arrogance. Nicole straightened. I am not letting some passenger intimidate me on my own flight. Nicole, I will handle it. She walked back into the aisle, heels clicking against the carpet. Her smile returned, polished and gleaming like armor. She stopped at Marcus's seat, holding the wine bottle as if offering peace. Refill, sir? She asked, her tone sweet enough to sting. Marcus looked up, his expression unreadable. You think a refill changes what you served? Her lips parted just slightly. I am just doing my job. That is the problem, he said quietly. You think this is your job? Passengers nearby shifted in their seats. A man with a gray tie raised an eyebrow. The couple in 2B pretended to scroll through their phones but tilted the screens toward the aisle. Nicole's smile flickered. Sir, I will have to ask you to lower your tone. Marcus blinked slowly. You have not heard my tone yet. She exhaled, her voice rising a notch. We have other guests to attend to. Please do not make this harder. He leaned back, unbothered. You are mistaking patience for permission. That line cut straight through the air. A few gasps, a faint murmur, the kind that spreads before something breaks. From the galley, Claire froze. She could not pretend anymore. She had seen enough, heard enough. Nicole was digging her own grave, and Claire was the only one with a shovel full of truth. Nicole crossed her arms. If you continue to speak to me that way, I will have to involve the captain. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then said, calm as stone, do what you must. But remember, I will also be speaking to your captain. That was the first time she truly hesitated. There was something in his tone measured, powerful, final. She turned quickly, retreating to the galley, her breath tight. Brian whispered, what did he say? Nicole grabbed a towel, wiping her hands even though they were clean. Nothing. Just nothing. Claire stepped closer, voice low but firm. You should stop. Nicole snapped. Excuse me? He is not who you think he is. Nicole laughed under her breath. He is exactly who I think he is. A man who thinks he deserves more than he paid for. No, Claire said, her voice steady now. He is a man who built what you are flying in. Nicole froze. What did you say? Claire took a small step closer. You heard me. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Then Nicole shook her head, dismissing it. You are out of line, Claire. I will be reporting you to management. Claire smiled faintly. You might want to report faster. Nicole stormed off toward the cockpit, every step sharper than the last. In the cabin, Marcus continued reading. His thumb tapped the screen twice, a coded rhythm only one person on the ground would understand. At that same moment, in a glass office overlooking downtown Los Angeles, a woman's phone vibrated. Rachel Harris, his executive operations director, glanced down and saw the message, Protocol 7, Phase 2, confirm on comm. She picked up the secure line immediately. Confirmed, sir, she said. Live link is stable. Incident recording has begun. Back on the plane, Claire stood near the curtain separating first class from business. Her heart raced, but her eyes were clear. She had made her choice. Nicole reached the cockpit and leaned inside. Captain Lewis, we have a passenger becoming difficult in first class. The captain did not even look up from his controls. Difficult how? Disrespectful. Aggressive. Has he threatened anyone? No, but his attitude is... Nicole, the captain interrupted. Unless he is breaking a rule or posing a safety issue, we are not escalating. The last time we did that, corporate chewed us alive. Nicole clenched her jaw. I am telling you, something feels off. Fine. Keep it professional. No more talking to him unless necessary. She left the cockpit and closed the door harder than she meant to. The sound made a few passengers look up. One woman frowned. Another man whispered, Is something wrong? Marcus looked around the cabin, every pair of eyes, every posture, every subtle shift in the air. He had seen this before in boardrooms, negotiations, conferences, the moment when truth starts to leak through fear. He leaned slightly toward the aisle, speaking just loud enough for Claire to hear. 5 minutes from now, you will understand why I said patience is dangerous. She nodded once, unsure what that meant but believing him anyway. Nicole returned to her service station, pretending to check the passenger list. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to type a note. Possible disturbance. Seat 3 amperes. But before she could, her screen blinked twice and locked. Access denied. She frowned, tapped again. Same result. Locked. In the seat behind her, Marcus's phone lit faintly. One soft vibration. The corner of his mouth curved into a line that was not quite a smile. Outside, the sunlight sharpened as the plane cut through a thin layer of cloud. Inside, the hierarchy of the cabin, the quiet code of who mattered and who did not, was starting to break apart, piece by piece. For the first time that flight, Nicole felt small. And Marcus, without moving, had already begun rewriting the air around her. For a few brief minutes, the cabin returned to a fragile calm. The flight attendants moved with rehearsed efficiency, collecting glasses and adjusting seatbelts as though nothing had happened. Yet every motion felt heavier now, as if gravity itself had taken sides. Marcus stared out the window, watching sunlight scatter across the wing like fragments of memory. The reflection of his face in the glass looked composed, but behind the stillness lay something else, an echo that had followed him for decades. He remembered another flight. He had been 19. Flying standby from Atlanta to Chicago for his first college internship interview. Back then, he had worn a suit 2 sizes too big and shoes he had polished with a towel in a dorm sink. He had arrived early, hopeful, carrying a briefcase filled with printed resume. The gate agent, a woman with kind eyes but a tired voice, had looked at his ticket and said, "You must have misunderstood. This is business class." He had pointed at the ticket again. She had smiled thinly, repeating herself as if English were optional when spoken to him. He had waited 5 hours for the next flight, sitting beside a janitor's cart, watching businessmen board one after another. He remembered the sound of the boarding call echoing in the terminal and how it felt like a door closing on the future. He carried that sound into every meeting, every deal, every sleepless night that followed. It had become his fuel, his quiet fire. Now, 30 years old and thousands of feet above the world that once denied him, the fire had returned, steady, blue, controlled. He turned slightly toward the aisle. Nicole stood near the curtain again, whispering with Brian. Claire sat at the jump seat, her gaze fixed downward, twisting her fingers in her lap. She looked like a confession waiting to be spoken. The plane's intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be beginning our beverage service for economy shortly." The captain's voice was calm, but the timing felt off too formal, too deliberate, as if meant to drown the tension in first class. Marcus pressed a button on his armrest, lowering his seat slightly. His phone remained unlocked in his hand, the screen dim but alive. The digital world was moving quietly behind him, emails syncing, internal systems aligning, the slow machinery of consequence preparing to turn. From 2 rows ahead, one of the suited passengers turned halfway in his seat. His voice carried just enough for the rest of first class to hear. "You would think someone dressed like that could at least say thank you." His companion smirked. "Maybe he thinks he is better than us." A third voice joined, soft but poisonous. "You can take the man out of coach." The sentence trailed off, unfinished but complete in meaning. Claire's head snapped up, her lips parted, ready to speak, but she stopped herself. The sound of injustice had a way of freezing people mid-breath. Marcus did not look at them. He simply said, without raising his voice, "Every seat has a price. Not every seat has value." The men fell quiet. One of them laughed awkwardly, pretending it was a joke, but the air had already turned heavy again. Nicole exhaled sharply. "Sir, I'm going to ask that we keep the peace here." Marcus looked at her, his voice even. "Peace does not mean silence." "Please do not make this difficult," she said, still trying to hold the tone of authority. "I am not making it difficult," he replied. "You are making it small." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, from behind him, a woman spoke. Her voice was soft but trembling with anger. "I saw what she did," the woman said. Every head turned. "She switched his plate. I watched it happen." It was the first crack in the wall. Nicole froze. "Ma'am, that is not." But the woman cut her off. "Do not lie. You were laughing with those men right before you served him." The murmurs started instantly low, buzzing, unstoppable. Claire looked up, eyes wide. The passengers, who had stayed silent now, glanced between Marcus and the flight attendant, like a jury unsure how to vote. Marcus turned toward the woman who had spoken. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded once. "You should not have to thank me for telling the truth." Nicole's voice rose, brittle. "This is getting out of hand." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "It got out of hand the moment you decided courtesy had a color." She flinched. The words landed with the quiet precision of a verdict. Brian stepped in quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Everyone, please, let us just relax." But the passengers were no longer relaxed. They were awake. Claire finally stood. "He is right," she said, voice trembling but clear. She mocked him. "I saw it, and I saw her change his meal." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "She admitted it." Another muttered, "Oh, this is bad." Nicole turned to her junior attendant, pale with disbelief. "Claire, what are you doing?" "The right thing," Claire replied. Nicole's composure cracked completely. "You have no idea who you are defending." Claire's eyes did not waver. "Neither do you." Marcus stood then, slow and deliberate. The movement silenced the entire cabin. His height, his calm, his presence, it all drew the space around him into focus. He looked at Nicole. "You wanted authority. Now you have accountability." For the first time, her voice faltered. "Who are you?" He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim black card, and placed it gently on the tray in front of her. The logo glinted under the light. Skyline Air Group, Executive Division. She stared at it, confused, then terrified. Marcus did not smile. He simply said, "I own the plane you are standing in." The cabin went completely silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to dim. And then, the faint chime of his phone broke the stillness, a single alert from Rachel Harris. "Protocol 7, Phase 3, complete." Marcus looked around the cabin once more. 5 minutes, he murmured again. 5 minutes, and the sky remembers who built it. No one dared to breathe. The trial had just begun, and every witness was seated in first class. For a long second, no one moved. The black card sat between them like a loaded truth, gleaming under the soft cabin light. Nicole's hands trembled where they hovered above the tray. The gold letters were clear, undeniable Skyline Air Group, Executive Division. Beneath it, embossed in quiet authority, Marcus Elijah Reed, Chief Executive Officer. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The hum of the aircraft filled the void, steady, judgmental, merciless. The same engines that moments ago had been background noise now sounded like witnesses. Claire stood frozen by the galley curtain, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The woman from row 2 held her breath. Even the men who had laughed earlier sat still, their confidence dissolving into discomfort. Marcus did not speak for several seconds. He let the silence do its work. Power does not need volume, it needs patience. Finally, Nicole whispered, "This cannot be real." Marcus met her eyes. "You are standing in my cabin. You are serving on my plane. What part of that feels unreal?" Her throat went dry. She glanced toward Brian for help, but his face had already drained of color. He knew the logo. Every employee did. It was printed on every manual, every paycheck, every staff badge. Brian stammered, "Sir, we did not." Marcus raised one hand slightly. "Stop. You did nothing. And that is exactly the problem." Nicole stepped back, shaking her head as if she could undo the last minute by refusing to see it. "I did not know." He cut her off gently but firmly. "You did not need to know who I was to treat me with respect." The words hit harder than any shout could have. The cabin seemed smaller now, the air thicker. A passenger near the front cleared his throat awkwardly. "Are you saying you actually run the company?" Marcus turned slightly toward him, calm as ever. "No, I built it." Murmurs broke out immediately, soft, shocked, disbelieving. The couple in seat 2B exchanged glances, the husband's face paling as the reality sank in. The man who had mocked him for his red blazer was now staring at his shoe. Marcus straightened his posture, the quiet composure of a man who had carried 1,000 such moments before. His voice remained even, deliberate. "Every one of you paid to be here. Every one of you expects service, safety, dignity. But some of you believe dignity is optional. It is not." "How?" Nicole swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "Sir, I am sorry. Do not apologize to me," he said. "Apologize to the uniform you wear. You just stained it." Claire stepped closer, her courage now visible in every motion. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "there are cameras on board. Everything that happened, it was recorded. Marcus nodded once. Good. Let truth have a witness. She hesitated, then added, should I alert corporate security? He gave her a look that could have frozen water. Already done. Nicole's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means the moment I identified myself, an internal system began to log every second of this flight, he said. Crew communications, passenger behavior, live cabin footage all synced to ground control. A murmur spread through the cabin. People shifted in their seats, glancing uneasily at the small cameras embedded above them. The laughter and arrogance that had filled the air earlier were gone. In their place was the quiet awareness of consequence. Nicole took a step forward, desperation breaking through her professionalism. Mr. Reed, please, I swear I did not intend. He interrupted, not with anger, but with something colder. Intent is not a shield, it is just a mirror. Look into it long enough, and you will see exactly what you chose to ignore. The cabin door leading to the cockpit clicked open slightly. Captain Lewis stepped out, his face calm but curious. Is there an issue here? He asked. Marcus turned toward him. Only an awakening. The captain frowned, glancing at Nicole, then at the card still sitting on the tray. His eyes widened. Sir, I had no idea you were on board. You were not supposed to, Marcus said evenly. I fly anonymously to see the truth that data cannot show me. The captain nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And what truth have you seen today, sir? Marcus's voice was low, but every syllable carried weight. That we still board prejudice before passengers. The words landed like thunder wrapped in silk. Nicole broke. Please, sir, I cannot lose my job. This is my life. Marcus studied her for a long, heavy moment. And this, he gestured around the cabin, was mine. Do you think I built this just to watch it become a place where people like me are still tested for belonging? Her lip quivered. I did not mean harm. Then maybe, he said quietly, it is time to learn what harm looks like to those who have lived it. Behind them, Claire exhaled shakily. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes, not for herself, but for the relief of finally witnessing justice breathe. The captain cleared his throat again. Mr. Reed, what would you like me to do? Marcus glanced at the attendants, then at the passengers. Stay on course, he said. Some turbulence is necessary. The announcement tone chimed overhead, startling everyone. A second later, Nicole's crew tablet blinked. The message was short, official, and final. Effective immediately, Flight 326 crew under review. Await further instruction from Executive Command. Her hands shook as she read it. The screen dimmed, then locked. Access denied. Marcus looked down at his own phone. A message flashed across it from Rachel Harris. Phase 4 complete. HR and operations alerted. Local base notified. He set the phone aside, calm as ever, and adjusted the cuff of his blazer. Then he looked back at Nicole. You said you have been doing this for 10 years, he said. 10 years of smiles, of policy, of judgment. 10 years of deciding who deserves grace and who deserves scrutiny. Tell me, has it made you powerful or small? She could not answer. Her tears came quietly, unnoticed by most, but not by Claire. Claire's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Some lessons required silence. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands. You do not need to fear me, Miss Lawson. You only need to remember me. Every passenger you meet after this will carry my shadow until you learn to see clearly. The engines droned on, steady, indifferent. But everyone aboard Flight 326 knew the air had changed. Somewhere deep inside that cabin, justice was no longer waiting to land. It was already in motion, and there was no altitude high enough to escape it. The captain had returned to the cockpit, but the tension he left behind did not move with him. It stayed in the air like static, clinging to every surface of first class. Every passenger could feel it, though none dared to speak. The hum of the engines filled the silence that people were too afraid to break. Nicole stood motionless beside the service counter. The color had drained from her face. Her hands, once so confident in their choreography of trays and smiles, now hung at her sides like she had forgotten what to do with them. She stared down at the black card still lying on the tray, its gold lettering reflecting the cabin light. Marcus Elijah Reed, Chief Executive Officer. Each letter seemed to pulse with judgment. Marcus sat back in his seat, watching the clouds drift by. His expression had not changed. Calm. controlled. But there was a precision to that calm, the kind that made everyone else aware of their own nervous movements. He was not angry, he was deliberate, and deliberate people are the ones you should fear most. Claire stepped closer. "Sir," she said softly, "should I?" He stopped her with a small gesture. "You have already done enough, Claire. The truth stands on its own." She nodded and retreated a few steps. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She had spoken up, broken rank, and now the entire cabin was holding its breath with her. Nicole finally moved. She picked up the card and held it between her fingers like something radioactive. I did not know," she whispered. Marcus's voice was calm, but his words were ice. "That is the second time you have said that. You did not know who I was. You did not know what your actions meant. You did not know what harm looks like when it is wearing a smile. Tell me, Miss Lawson, what exactly do you know?" Her lips trembled. "I know that I made a mistake." "No," he said quietly. "A mistake is spilling a drink. This was a decision." The couple in seat 2B sat rigid. The man leaned forward, whispering, "This is unreal." His wife placed a hand on his arm, eyes wide. "No," she said, "this is overdue." The intercom clicked softly, and a voice from the cockpit spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting some light turbulence ahead. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The timing felt almost poetic. The aircraft began to tremble slightly, a low vibration that rolled through the floor. Nicole gripped the counter for balance. The passengers did not know if the turbulence was from the sky or from what was happening inside it. Marcus's phone vibrated once. He glanced down. A new message appeared from Rachel Harris. "Local operations confirmed. Legal and HR standing by at LAX. Public relations prepped. Full documentation secured." He locked the screen and looked up again. His voice cut through the rumble like a blade. "Miss Lawson, you are not the only one being watched today. Every person in this cabin will walk off this plane remembering what happened here because you tried to make humiliation an act of service." Nicole blinked rapidly. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. "Please, Mr. Reed, I was following protocol. I thought—" He interrupted softly. "Protocol does not excuse prejudice. You served arrogance on a silver tray and called it policy." The turbulence deepened for a moment, the aircraft dipping slightly before steadying again. A few passengers gasped. Someone crossed themselves quietly. Claire grabbed the back of a seat for balance. "Mr. Reed, should I inform the captain again?" He shook his head. "No. Let the sky settle. We are not done yet." Then he turned to the passengers who had mocked him earlier. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone level but unyielding, "you found amusement in what you thought was a joke. Tell me, is it still funny now that the punchline is your reflection?" The men did not answer. One of them shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. Another looked away entirely. The laughter that had once filled the aisle now felt like evidence. Marcus continued, each word precise. "Every one of you represents the same system that pretends not to see bias when it is neatly dressed in etiquette. You watched, you heard, and you chose silence because it did not hurt you. That is how prejudice survives, not by power, but by permission." No one dared move. The only sound was the low hum of the engines and the soft creak of leather as someone shifted in their seat. Nicole finally whispered, "What happens now?" Marcus looked directly at her. "Now, you face the mirror you avoided. Corporate operations will meet us when we land. You will be escorted off this plane, along with anyone who helped you enforce your judgment." Her breath caught. "Escorted off?" He nodded once. "Actions have consequences, even in the sky." The woman from row 2 spoke again, her voice firmer this time. "Good. About time someone said it." Nicole turned toward her, eyes wet. "You do not understand," the woman interrupted sharply. "No, I understand perfectly. I have been you, and I have been him. One is easy, the other is exhausting." Marcus looked at the woman and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Then he spoke, quieter now, almost reflective. "I used to think silence was safety, that if I just worked harder, built higher, they would stop seeing my skin before they saw my worth. But prejudice is patient. It waits for moments like this, small, public, polite. That is why it must be confronted where it lives." Ugh. His voice softened, but the edges stayed sharp. "Miss Lawson, today is not about punishment. It is about accountability. You wanted to remind me of where I came from. Let me remind you of where you stand." Nicole's tears finally broke free. She covered her face with her hands. shoulders shaking silently. Claire looked away, not from pity, but from respect for the truth, for the weight of it, for the cost of it. The turbulence faded. The plane leveled out again, smooth as if the sky itself had exhaled. The captain's voice came back over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have passed through the rough patch. You may move freely once again." But no one moved. No one spoke. Marcus leaned back, his tone almost conversational now. 5 minutes, he said again, softly this time, almost to himself. In 5 minutes, the system that protects arrogance will answer for it. He glanced at his watch. The seconds moved steadily, unstoppable. Outside, the clouds parted to reveal the vast stretch of open sky, endless, unjudging, free. Inside, humanity was still learning how to rise to that height. And in that moment, Marcus Elijah Reed was not just a man in first class. He was the mirror the world had been avoiding. The plane cruised steady now, slicing through a corridor of clouds that glowed orange in the setting Sunday. But the beauty outside did not soften the tension inside. It had only changed its color from outrage to realization, from judgment to silence. Every passenger in first class had become a witness, and the weight of that role was sinking in. The man in seat 2 Amperes, who had been chuckling earlier, shifted uncomfortably. His laughter now felt like a stain that could not be scrubbed away. The woman beside him clutched her scarf, eyes darting between Marcus and Nicole as if she were watching history being recorded in real time. Marcus had not spoken for a full minute. He did not need to. His stillness said more than any word could. He sat upright, eyes fixed forward, one hand resting lightly on his phone. The quiet power in that pose made everyone else look small. Finally, Brian broke the silence. "Sir, Mr. Reed," he began, his voice uncertain. "May I say something?" Marcus turned his head slightly. "You may." Brian took a breath. "I have worked for Skyline Air for 6 years. I have seen passengers be rude, demanding, disrespectful. But what happened here, this was not that. You were calm, you were polite, and she—" He hesitated, glancing at Nicole. "She was not. I should have said something sooner." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "And why did you not?" Brian swallowed. "Because silence is safe." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, until it is not." That single sentence seemed to hang in the cabin air like a law of nature. From the third row, a passenger cleared his throat. It was the man who had mocked Marcus earlier, the one in the gray tie. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "for what it is worth, I am sorry. I did not realize who you were." Marcus looked at him, and for the first time, there was a flicker of emotion behind his calm. "That," he said softly, "is the point. You should not have needed to know." The man lowered his gaze, shame settling over him like fog. Nicole's breathing was shallow, her eyes red. She tried to speak, but every time she opened her mouth, the words died before they could form. The confidence that had carried her through 10 years of flights and smiling passengers had dissolved in the space of 15 minutes. Claire stood quietly near the curtain, her hands clasped in front of her. She had chosen her side, and the choice had set her free. Then, from the back of first class, a voice rose clear, steady, unexpected. "My name is Daniel Cross," the man said. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a calm dignity that drew attention without effort. "I am a journalist. I have covered discrimination cases for most of my career. What just happened here, this will matter. People need to see it." Nicole turned toward him, panic flashing across her face. "Please, do not." Marcus lifted a hand gently, stopping her words without touching her. "Let him speak." Daniel continued. "I have reported on lawsuits, on firings, on corporate apologies. But what I have never seen is someone of your status showing restraint instead of rage. You did not yell, you did not curse. You let truth do the talking." Marcus's expression stayed neutral, but his tone carried gravity. "Anger is expected. Silence is strategy." Daniel nodded. "And now that strategy has witnesses." The passengers shifted, the tension giving way to something heavier, guilt mixed with admiration. They were realizing that they had been part of a social experiment without consent, one that reflected the real world too clearly for comfort. Nicole's voice finally cracked through the silence. "Mr. Reed, I cannot change what I did. I know that. But please, please, do not destroy my career." Marcus's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You destroyed your own the moment you decided to measure worth by appearance." Tears streamed freely down her face now. She looked at the floor, whispering, "I thought I was better than that." "You are not alone," Marcus said softly. "The system that built you was designed to make you believe that." He turned slightly, addressing the whole cabin. "That is why I fly unannounced every quarter. Not for convenience, not for comfort, for truth. The walls of corporate offices cannot show you who your people really are, but a cabin at 30,000 feet can. There is no distance between power and prejudice when you are locked in the same air." No one spoke. The truth was too large to argue with. Claire finally broke the silence, her voice trembling but resolute. "I think I understand now why you said 5 minutes. It was not just about time, was it?" Marcus glanced at her, his tone gentler than before. "No, Claire. It was about revelation. In 5 minutes, masks fall faster than planes." The intercom dinged softly. The captain's voice returned, formal but cautious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received instructions to maintain altitude and await communication from Los Angeles operations. Everything is under control. Please remain seated." That line, "Everything is under control," rang hollow. Everyone knew control had already changed hands. Marcus lifted his phone again. The screen showed a new message. "Phase 5 initiated. Internal investigation team notified. Press statement pending your approval." "Oh, my data." He typed one line in response. "No statement. Let the footage speak." As he set the phone down, Daniel Cross watched him carefully. "You know this will go viral once it lands, right?" Marcus nodded slowly. "It will. But I am not doing this for the views." "Then why?" Daniel asked. Marcus looked out the window at the endless sky, his reflection framed by the clouds. "Because people keep asking how racism survives in a world of policies. This," he gestured around the cabin, "is the answer. It hides behind etiquette and smiles. It wears uniforms and says sir while cutting dignity into small, polite pieces. And the only way to end it is to stop pretending not to see it." Daniel leaned back, silent. Every word was true, and every truth carried a cost. Nicole sank into the jump seat, her shoulders slumped. Claire stood beside her, eyes filled not with pity, but with the weight of awakening. The other passengers sat in uneasy stillness, each one rethinking what they had witnessed, what they had allowed, what they might have done differently if they had known. Outside, the sky was darkening toward twilight. The engines hummed with that eternal calm that never cared who sat where. But inside the cabin of Flight 326, a different kind of flight had begun, the one that leaves ignorance behind and climbs toward accountability. And for the first time since boarding, Marcus Elijah Reed allowed himself a quiet smile, not of triumph, but of clarity. Because justice, when it finally arrives, does not shout. It simply takes its seat. The sky outside had turned to a muted silver, that in-between hour when the day forgets what it is. Light slid through the cabin windows like liquid glass, washing over faces that now avoided each other. First class had become a courtroom without walls, where every breath felt like testimony. Nicole sat rigid in the jump seat near the galley. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her hair slightly undone, her posture no longer built from confidence but from exhaustion. She stared straight ahead, barely blinking, as if hoping invisibility might save her. Marcus sat quietly, his red blazer still immaculate, his expression carved from patience. He had not raised his voice, not once, and yet his presence had reordered the entire room. That was the difference between noise and authority. One demands attention, the other commands it. Claire approached slowly, holding a bottle of water. Her hands trembled as she offered it to him. "Sir," she whispered, "you should drink something." He took it with a nod, unscrewing the cap carefully. "Thank you, Claire." His tone was soft, deliberate, almost kind. She lingered beside him, uncertain whether to stay or move away. "I have seen passengers shout," she said after a pause. "I have seen them curse, threaten, even throw things. But you just sit there. It is like you already knew this was going to happen." He looked at her, eyes calm. "It always happens. The details change, but the pattern never does." Claire frowned slightly. "Then why do you put yourself through it? You could fly private every time. No one would question you." "Who?" He twisted the cap back onto the bottle, setting it neatly on the tray table. "Because silence builds nothing. I fly to see how much the world has changed and how much it has not." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. For a moment, she looked down the aisle at Nicole, who sat motionless. Then she asked quietly, "Do you ever forgive them?" Marcus took a long breath, his gaze unfocused, as if watching a film only he could see. Forgiveness is not a favor to them. It is a responsibility to myself, but I do not forget. Forgetting is how systems survive. The words settled over her like dust, fine and heavy. She wanted to respond, but the intercom clicked before she could speak. Attention, crew. This is the captain. We have been instructed by operations to remain in communication until further notice. There will be a scheduled report upon arrival in Los Angeles. The coded message was clear to the staff. Corporate was already waiting. Marcus leaned back, his tone low enough for only Claire to hear. They think this is about a single flight. It never is. From across the cabin, the journalist, Daniel Cross, lifted his phone slightly. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I understand you did not want publicity, but this is history in motion. The footage could change policy overnight." Marcus turned to him. "Policies change easily. People do not." Daniel nodded. "Still, seeing it matters. You know that." "Oh." Marcus studied him for a beat, then said, "Yes, but I am not after spectacle. I am after proof." Nicole shifted in her seat, her voice breaking through the quiet. "Proof of what?" Marcus looked at her, expression steady. "That equality cannot exist in a world built on assumption." She blinked, whispering, "You make it sound like I am the whole problem." He shook his head. "You are not the problem. You are the pattern." The cabin fell silent again. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. One of the men who had mocked him earlier spoke up, voice uncertain. "Sir, I think we all understand your point. Maybe we can just move on." Marcus's gaze shifted toward him, calm but sharp. "That is what people say every time injustice gets uncomfortable. They ask to move on. But I did not start this. I just refused to keep walking past it." The man had no response. He sank back into his seat, eyes lowered. Nicole's voice cracked. "You have no idea what my life is like. I worked double shifts for years, fought for this position, endured rude passengers every day. I am not some villain." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "I do not doubt your struggle, Miss Lawson, but hardship does not erase accountability. You can be both exhausted and wrong." Her tears returned, silent now. He continued, quieter but still firm. "I built this airline to create access, to redefine what excellence looks like. Yet here we are, proving that power does not travel far enough if it cannot reach the heart of the person serving coffee." Claire lowered her head. Daniel typed a note into his phone without looking up. The rest of the passengers sat in uneasy stillness, each one silently replaying their own moments of judgment times they had looked, assumed, dismissed. The plane tilted slightly, beginning its gradual descent. Sunlight flared through the window and spilled across Marcus's face. It painted him in gold, not like a king, but like a reminder that dignity was its own kind of light. Nicole stared at him, almost whispering, "What will happen to me?" He met her gaze evenly. "That depends on who you decide to be after this." She swallowed. "Do you think people can change?" "Yes," he said, "but only when the truth hurts more than the lie they have been living." The journalist looked up again. "And what about the passengers?" Marcus turned toward him. "They have already changed. They just do not realize it yet." A ripple of recognition passed through the cabin, invisible but real. People were not just watching him, they were watching themselves through him. The flight attendant from economy opened the curtain slightly, unsure if she should enter. Her voice was nervous. "Mr. Reed, sir, the captain says we will be landing in about 40 minutes. Marcus nodded. "Thank you. Tell him to proceed as planned." She hesitated. "Sir, may I say something?" He gestured for her to continue. I just wanted to say thank you, for not yelling, for handling it the way you did. My mother always told me that real power does not need to prove itself." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Your mother was right." The attendant smiled nervously, nodded, and slipped back behind the curtain. When the door closed, the silence returned, but it was no longer the same silence. It was charged with understanding, heavy but clean. Marcus took another slow sip of water. "When we land," he said softly, "the sky will stay exactly the same. The only question is whether the people under it will." Outside, the last light of day dissolved into darkness, and the clouds ahead began to glow faintly from the city waiting below. Inside that cabin, no one could look away from the truth anymore. The air felt lighter but not free, just honest. The descent had begun. The digital map on the screen showed a glowing path over the California coastline, the line bending toward Los Angeles. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber, casting long shadows that looked almost cinematic across the faces of the passengers. But no one was relaxed. The kind of silence that filled the room now was not peace, it was reckoning. Marcus sat in the same position he had held since the confrontation began. His phone rested on the tray, face down again, as though even technology knew to stay quiet. Outside his window, the sky was a deep indigo, the faint line of sunset fading into darkness. Nicole still sat near the galley door, her head bowed, hands clasped together tightly. She looked smaller than she had an hour ago, stripped of the confidence that once defined her. The shine of her uniform had dulled under the weight of realization. Every second she sat there was a second of living inside her own mistake. Brian, the other attendant, stood frozen near the aisle, unsure whether to help her, to comfort her, or to stay silent. Claire stayed close to him, her eyes red from holding back tears, but her posture firm. She had spoken truth once today. She would not regret it. The passengers were scattered between guilt and awe. Some looked out the windows, pretending to admire the view. But everyone knew they were just avoiding their own reflection. The air was heavy with something unspoken, like a storm waiting to break. Daniel Cross, the journalist, turned toward Marcus again. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "what happens when we land?" Marcus's gaze stayed on the horizon. "The truth will land with us." Daniel hesitated. "You mean the footage?" He nodded once. "Every second of it. Corporate security has already received the live feed. Internal investigators are waiting at the gate." Nicole's voice cracked through the quiet. "So that is it? I lose everything because of one mistake?" Marcus turned his head slightly, his tone calm but cutting. "You did not lose it. You revealed it. The system gave you authority, and you used it to measure who deserved grace. You forgot that uniforms do not grant character, they expose it." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. Claire stepped forward, her voice soft. "Mr. Reed, sir. I do not think she meant to be cruel." Marcus nodded slowly. "That is what makes it worse." The words were gentle but devastating. They lingered in the air, echoing against the walls of the cabin. Nicole whispered through her tears, "I thought I was being funny. I thought he could take it." He looked at her directly. Racism often sounds like a joke when it is spoken by the comfortable. No one dared breathe. A voice came from row 4, the woman who had defended him earlier. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I am white. I grew up in a place where people thought jokes like that were harmless. But watching this, it feels like watching a mirror I never wanted to look into." Marcus studied her face. "Then you are already ahead of most. Awareness is not guilt. It is the beginning of responsibility." The woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. The captain's voice broke through the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our final descent into Los Angeles. Please remain seated and ensure all electronic devices are in airplane mode." For the first time since takeoff, Marcus closed his eyes. The announcement tone, the mechanical clicks, the rustle of seat belts, it all blurred together with memory. He remembered being a child on his first flight, looking out the window and thinking the sky was the only place where color did not matter. Years later, he had learned that prejudice travels just as easily as people do. When he opened his eyes, the city lights below had come into view, a galaxy of gold and white spreading endlessly beneath them. He turned his head toward Nicole again. "Miss Lawson," he said softly, "you asked me earlier if I believe people can change. I do. But change begins when we stop pretending intent erases impact. You cannot unserve that plate. You cannot unsay that joke. You can only decide what kind of person walks off this plane." She nodded weakly, tears falling freely now. Claire looked between them, her voice shaking. "What will happen when we land?" Marcus's answer was simple. "Justice will board." Daniel lifted his phone, still recording. "I am documenting this moment," he said. "Not to exploit it, but because stories like this, truths like this, have power. They change the way people think, if they are told right." Marcus gave him a small, knowing nod. "Then tell it right, not as a spectacle, as a reminder." Outside, the landing gear extended with a deep mechanical thud. The cabin shuddered lightly, signaling the approach of reality. Passengers gripped their armrests instinctively, as if holding on to something more than balance, as if holding on to conscience itself. The plane began its descent through thin clouds, the city growing larger, the lights sharper. Brian walked slowly to Nicole's side and knelt beside her. "We will face it together," he whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it." She looked at him through red eyes and nodded, grateful but broken. Claire placed a hand on her shoulder, her own voice steady. Doing the right thing hurts first. Then it heals. Marcus overheard, and for the first time in hours, the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Not a smile of victory, but one of recognition. He had seen this before. When truth finally pierced the shell of denial, it left quiet behind it, not noise. The wheels hit the runway with a hard, echoing thud. The plane bounced once, then steadied. The sound of rubber against asphalt filled the cabin, followed by the groan of slowing engines. The passengers exhaled collectively, not from relief, but from release. As they taxied toward the gate, Marcus looked out the window at the rows of lights lining the runway. Each one reflected in his eyes like tiny pieces of memory. He spoke softly, almost to himself, but the nearest passengers heard. The ground always looks different when you land with the truth. The plane came to a final stop. Seatbelt signs chimed off. The cabin lights brightened, but no one stood up. They waited, uncertain, as if standing would make the moment real. Marcus reached for his phone. A message appeared from Rachel Harris. Ground team ready, terminal secured. HR and legal counsel on site. He locked the screen again and stood slowly. The sound of his seatbelt unclicking echoed through the cabin like a verdict being read. He adjusted his blazer, smooth, deliberate. And then, with a calm voice that carried the weight of everything that had happened, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with Skyline Air." It was not sarcasm, it was ceremony. Because this flight was no longer about altitude. It was about humanity brought down to earth where it always belonged. The plane's engines whirred softly, cooling down as the aircraft rolled to a stop at the gate. The air inside the cabin felt denser now, thick with anticipation. No one moved. The usual shuffle of passengers eager to grab their bags was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt like a collective confession. Through the window, Los Angeles glowed under a dark sky. Blue runway lights stretched into the distance, blinking in quiet rhythm. On the tarmac, 3 black vehicles waited near the terminal's private entry bay. Their engines were on, their headlights muted but deliberate. The crew knew what that meant. Nicole's breath caught in her throat when she saw them. She recognized the Insignia Corporate Operations, the same division that handled executive arrivals and disciplinary reviews. She whispered under her breath, "They are here for me." Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his blazer, his movements unhurried. He stood, smooth and certain, as if the world around him had already fallen into place. When he looked toward Nicole, his eyes held neither anger nor pity, just the gravity of truth. "Miss Lawson," he said, "before anyone steps off this plane, I need you to hear something." Her voice trembled. "Yes, sir." He paused for a moment, letting the quiet do its work. "When I built this company, I promised myself that dignity would never be optional here. Not for passengers, not for staff, not for anyone. But policy cannot protect what the human heart refuses to learn. That is what today proved." Nicole swallowed hard, her tears silent now. He continued, "You thought you were following routine. You thought you were in control. But control without compassion is just cruelty, dressed as procedure." Every word landed like a verdict. Brian looked down at the floor, guilt twisting in his chest. He had not spoken up. He had watched it unfold. And watching, he now realized, was the same as participating. Claire stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet but steady. "Mr. Reed, sir, should we let the passengers disembark?" "Not yet," he said softly. "Let them understand the ending before they walk into comfort again." The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but uncertain. "Mr. Reed, Operations has requested we hold boarding bridge deployment until further instruction." Marcus pressed the intercom button on his armrest. "Tell them they will have it in 2 minutes." He turned back to the passengers. "I want you all to remember this moment," he said, his voice low but commanding. "In your homes, your offices, your boardrooms, remember what silence costs. You saw injustice and waited for someone else to speak. Do not ever wait again." The cabin stayed silent, the air vibrating with the weight of his words. Nicole finally stood. Her legs were unsteady, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Reed, I do not have the right words. I cannot fix what I did, but I need you to know I will remember this for the rest of my life." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "That is how change begins." Claire exhaled softly. relief and sorrow mingling in her chest. The journalist, Daniel Cross, lowered his camera slightly. "Mr. Reed," he said, "do you realize what you just did? This is going to redefine how companies handle accountability." Marcus glanced at him. "If accountability becomes performance, it loses its meaning. Let this be more than a headline." Daniel nodded, solemn. "It will be." The captain emerged from the cockpit, hat in hand. "Sir," he said carefully, "corporate has confirmed the operations team is ready to board. Do you wish to address them privately?" Marcus shook his head. "No. What happened in public will be corrected in public." The captain nodded and returned to the cockpit. Within seconds, the jet bridge extended, locking into place with a dull mechanical thud. The sound echoed through the cabin like the closing of a chapter. 2 women and 1 man in dark suits stepped aboard. Their faces were composed, their demeanor professional but alert. They carried tablets and communication earpieces, their posture crisp and formal. The leader, a tall woman with a calm voice, spoke first. "Mr. Reed, we are here at your request. We have the internal report from flight surveillance ready for confirmation." Marcus gestured toward Nicole and Brian. "These are the employees involved. Claire Williams is the attending witness." The woman nodded. "Understood. Mr. Reed, per protocol, do you wish to initiate immediate suspension pending investigation?" Marcus looked at Nicole, then at Brian. "Yes, but not out of vengeance, out of consequence. Let the footage show exactly what happened. Let their own actions testify." The operations officer turned to Nicole. "Miss Lawson, please remain seated until escorted. Your access credentials have been temporarily deactivated." Nicole nodded weakly. "Understood." Brian's voice cracked. "Sir, Marcus raised a hand gently. "You froze. Many do. Learn from it. Next time, do not choose comfort over courage." Brian's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sir." Marcus turned to Claire. "And thank you for remembering your humanity before remembering your position." She blinked fast, fighting tears. "I only did what was right." That," Marcus said, "is rarer than you think." The lead officer turned to him. "Mr. Reed, we will escort the passengers shortly. Would you like a private exit?" He shook his head. "No, I will walk out the same way I walked in." The officer inclined her head respectfully. "Understood, sir." Marcus reached for his briefcase, tucking the black card back inside. Then he looked around the cabin one last time. The faces that had once judged him now looked at him with reverence, shame, or awe, but he felt none of it. What he felt was finality. He spoke softly, but every word carried. "The world loves the illusion of equality until it is forced to confront its reflection. Today, the sky showed us ours." He turned toward the aisle, and the passengers instinctively stood to let him pass. As he walked toward the exit, no one clapped, no one cheered. Respect does not need applause. It only needs acknowledgement. When he reached the door, he paused for one final glance back. Nicole's eyes met his. For a heartbeat, she looked like a student, seeing her first lesson too late. Marcus said quietly, "Good luck, Miss Lawson." Then he stepped into the bridge, and the doors closed behind him with the sound of justice sealing itself in place. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The engines were silent now, but the echo of what had happened would travel much farther than the flight path ever could. The air outside the aircraft was cool and heavy with night. The hum of the terminal surrounded everything, rolling luggage, distant chatter, announcements echoing over the speakers, but in the private jetway of Gate 42, there was only stillness. Every sound seemed to bend away from the man who had just stepped through the cabin door. Marcus Elijah Reed paused for a moment at the threshold, adjusting his blazer. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass wall beside him, framed by the blinking lights of the tarmac. Behind that reflection, 3 dark SUVs waited in a line, their engines running low and steady. One of the corporate officers followed him out, tablet in hand. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "the internal investigation team is ready to debrief. The legal counsel is on site in the executive terminal." He nodded once, eyes still on the plane. "Handle the procedures. Ensure that the report is transparent, not sanitized." "Yes, sir." She hesitated. "Would you like us to remove the cabin footage from internal servers until reviewed?" Marcus turned toward her, his voice even but firm. "No. Let every employee see it. Let the truth do what policies could not." She lowered her eyes. "Understood, sir." He looked back at the plane, its lights still glowing softly against the night. Through the window, He could see the silhouettes of passengers, still seated inside, frozen between shock and reflection. He could almost feel their thoughts hanging in the air. He walked slowly down the jet bridge, his footsteps echoing against the metal floor. When he reached the end, a familiar voice greeted him. Mr. Reed. Rachel Harris, his operations director, stood waiting with a folder in one hand and a calm, controlled expression. Her tone carried the same precision she used in every boardroom. I watched the feed in real time, she said quietly. It was difficult to witness. Marcus met her gaze. Good. Growth should be uncomfortable. She handed him the folder. The preliminary review is here. HR has already deactivated the crew's credentials and begun the disciplinary process. The passengers involved have been flagged for internal inquiry as well. He took the folder but did not open it. No one is to lose their job out of anger, he said. Only truth will decide the consequence. Not rage, not optics. Rachel nodded. Of course. She hesitated, then added, the press already caught wind that something happened aboard Flight 326. It will be on the morning cycle. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed calm. Then let them talk. People will say what they want. They always do. But this time, they will not speak without evidence. Rachel followed him as he began walking toward the private terminal. The polished floor reflected the dim overhead lights, and the rhythm of his steps was deliberate, slow, steady, unbothered. As they walked, she said softly, You have flown anonymously dozens of times, sir. Why tonight? He looked straight ahead. Because the world is louder than ever, but listening less than ever. Sometimes the only way to expose truth is to be underestimated. She was quiet for a moment. Do you ever tire of being the lesson? He gave a small, sad smile. It is not about fatigue, Rachel. It is about necessity. They reached the terminal door. Beyond the glass, 2 uniformed security officers stood at attention. The lead officer opened the door and stepped aside. Welcome back, Mr. Reed. Marcus nodded as he passed. Thank you. Inside the private terminal, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. A handful of corporate representatives waited near the conference area, their faces a mix of respect and unease. They had all seen the footage by now, every minute of it. Rachel gestured toward the conference table. Would you like to review the logs before addressing the board? He shook his head. Not yet. I do not want data to speak before I have spoken as a man. She understood and fell silent. Marcus walked toward the large glass window that overlooked the runway. Outside, the plane was still parked, its jet bridge attached, its engines quiet. Through the faint reflection, he could see his own outline superimposed against it, 2 versions of himself separated by glass, one public, one private. He thought of Nicole's face when she realized who he was, the fear, the confusion, the humanity that arrived too late. He spoke softly, more to himself than to anyone else. The world does not need another scandal. It needs memory. Rachel stepped closer. The board will likely push for a statement before sunrise. They will want to control the narrative. Marcus turned toward her, his tone unflinching. We are not controlling anything. We are confessing. She blinked. Confessing? Yes, he said. Every company says it stands for equality. Few admit when it fails to protect it. We will not polish this moment. We will own it. She nodded, her voice quiet. Then the world will know exactly who you are. Marcus looked out at the aircraft again, his reflection clear in the glass. Good, he said. That was the point. A long silence followed. The hum of the terminal faded until the only sound was the faint echo of jets taking off in the distance. Rachel finally spoke again. What will happen to her? He exhaled slowly. Discipline will follow, but I hope she learns. I hope this moment stays with her every time she looks at another person. If she grows from it, then this flight will not have been wasted. Rachel nodded. And you, sir? What will you take from it? He turned, walking slowly toward the exit that led to the car waiting outside. That dignity is still the rarest currency in the world, and I intend to keep investing in it. When he stepped through the doors, the cool night air wrapped around him again. The driver opened the door to the black SUV. Marcus paused for one last look at the aircraft behind him. Its metal surface gleamed under the floodlights, beautiful, powerful, silent. He thought of something his mother once said before his first business deal. Power means nothing if it does not make people safer in your presence. He whispered it now under his breath. letting the words mix with the hum of the engines in the distance. Then he got into the car. The door closed with a solid click, sealing the night away. As the SUV pulled from the curb and merged onto the private road leading out of the airport, Marcus leaned his head back against the seat. The lights of the runway drifted past his window like a moving constellation. Tomorrow, the world would know what happened. But tonight, he did not think about headlines or reputations. He thought about the sky, how it never judges, never chooses, never divides. It simply holds everyone the same. And maybe, he thought, that is what leadership should do too. The black SUV glided out of the restricted terminal and onto the open airport road, its tinted windows reflecting the floodlights from the runway. The hum of the tires on the concrete sounded steady, like a metronome marking the end of one truth and the beginning of another. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and rain. Marcus Elijah Reed sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the blur of city lights growing larger ahead. Rachel Harris sat across from him, her tablet resting in her lap. She had worked beside him for nearly 10 years, long enough to read the pauses between his words. But tonight, there were no words at all. Only the low rhythm of his breathing, calm but heavy, like a man carrying too much history. Finally, she broke the silence. "Sir, you know this will reach the public by morning. The media teams are already calling for statements." Marcus's eyes stayed on the road ahead. "Let them call. They will shape it however they want unless we act fast," she said carefully. "If we do not speak first, they will write the story for us." Marcus turned slightly toward her. The passing light from a street lamp cut across his face, revealing a calm that was sharper than steel. "Rachel, the truth does not need spin. It needs stillness. The world can decide what it wants to believe. I will not perform integrity." She studied him for a moment. "That is not strategy." "No," he said. "That is principle." The driver spoke softly from the front seat. "Mr. Reed, we will arrive at headquarters in 15 minutes. Marcus nodded once. "Thank you." Outside, Los Angeles unfolded a city glittering with contradictions. Towers of glass and power rose over streets that hummed with exhaustion. To Marcus, the view was familiar, almost symbolic. The world was always divided between the few who could see the system and the many who lived beneath it. He closed his eyes briefly and let his mind drift. The flight replayed behind his eyelids like film Nicole's smirk, the laughter, the silence afterward, the quiet shift when fear replaced arrogance. He did not feel triumph. What he felt was gravity. Because every time justice arrived, it came carrying the weight of everything that had been ignored before it. Rachel broke the silence again. "Do you want me to prepare a press draft anyway? Something controlled, factual, no embellishments." Marcus opened his eyes. "Write one, but do not release it until after sunrise. Let the truth breathe before we speak." She nodded. "Understood." He glanced at her tablet. "What is the status of the crew?" "Operations confirmed suspension for Nicole Lawson and Brian Chambers," Rachel said. "Claire Williams has been placed under protection as a whistleblower. HR wants your personal input on the next steps." Marcus looked thoughtful. "Send Claire a message from me. Tell her courage is not a career risk, it is a calling." Rachel smiled faintly. She will remember that for the rest of her life. He leaned back, adjusting his sleeve. "Good, then this flight already changed something." For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The SUV moved through the city like a shadow, passing silent intersections and rows of sleeping houses. The quiet was thick but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after truth has been spoken, the calm between storms. When they reached the Skyline Air corporate tower, the driver pulled into the underground entrance. The building stood tall above them, its glass facade glowing faintly with the reflection of the city lights. The company's logo, a silver wing inside a circle, gleamed from the top floor like a halo. The driver stopped, stepped out, and opened the door. Marcus climbed out slowly, straightening his jacket. His shoes echoed against the marble of the private entranceway. Rachel followed, clutching the folder tightly against her chest. Inside, the night staff froze the moment they saw him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few phones were lowered in haste. They all knew. The footage had already circulated internally. Marcus walked through the lobby without saying a word. The employees parted quietly, watching him pass as if witnessing something larger than their jobs, like watching justice in motion. In the elevator, Rachel spoke again. "You realize, sir, what this means for the brand?" Marcus looked at the closing doors. Brand is reputation. Dignity is legacy. Only one of those survives time. She nodded but said nothing more. The elevator climbed to the top floor, smooth and silent. When the doors opened, the view of Los Angeles spread wide across the glass office. The city looked endless, alive, unaware of the lesson unfolding above it. Marcus walked to his desk, set down his phone, and looked out the window. His reflection stared back at him, older, wiser, but tired in ways success could not heal. Rachel stood a few steps behind him. "Would you like me to schedule a board meeting first thing in the morning?" "Yes," he said quietly, "and make sure every department head is present. We will not discuss the incident. We will discuss prevention. One happens before the other." She hesitated. "And the passengers?" "Refund every ticket in first class," he said. "Send a personal letter to each. Tell them they witnessed company reform in real time." Rachel blinked. "That is bold." "That is honest," he replied. "And honesty is cheaper than lawsuits." She smiled faintly. "You always said transparency is our strongest currency." He nodded. "Because it is the only one that buys trust." Outside the glass, the first hint of dawn began to rise, pale and distant. Marcus watched the sky lighten, the horizon turning the color of quiet forgiveness. "Do you ever get tired of fighting the same fight?" Rachel asked softly. He looked at her reflection in the glass. "You do not get tired when you are flying against gravity. You just get stronger wings." The room fell silent again. The city began to wake below them, cars moving, lights flickering, life resuming as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But Marcus knew better. Change rarely looked dramatic. It looked like a quiet shift in the air, the moment before something irreversible begins. He turned from the window, his voice steady. "Rachel, clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. I am flying again." She frowned slightly. "Another inspection?" "No," he said. "A reminder. Every system that forgets compassion needs to be tested until it remembers." He picked up his phone and walked toward his office door. Behind him, the rising sun spilled through the glass, turning the room to gold. And for the first time that night, Marcus Elijah Reed let himself exhale, not as a man who had won, but as one who had kept his promise to the sky. The morning light was soft when it touched the glass walls of the Skyline Air headquarters. It stretched slowly across the carpet, golden and deliberate, like the beginning of something that refused to rush. Inside the executive floor, the building hummed with quiet urgency. Emails pinged, phones vibrated, and screens flickered with headlines that all carried the same words. Skyline Air CEO confronts racism at 30,000 feet. Marcus Elijah Reed stood near the window, hands folded behind his back. From this height, Los Angeles looked peaceful, unaware that the city below was already alive with opinions, with narratives twisting and multiplying. But he had expected that. Truth never arrives alone, it brings distortion as its shadow. Rachel Harris entered the office, a tablet in hand and an expression that balanced respect with exhaustion. "It is everywhere," she said. "The footage from the plane, the passenger recordings, even the audio from the cabin intercom. It has gone viral overnight." Marcus turned his head slightly. "How many views?" "Almost 20 million, she said softly, "across every platform." He nodded once, not with pride, but with the understanding that visibility and victory are not the same thing. "What are they saying?" Rachel hesitated. "Half the world is applauding. The other half is debating whether you set it up." Marcus's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Humanity never trusts dignity unless it performs." She exhaled. "The board is requesting an immediate press conference. They want you to control the story before the media turns it into a spectacle." He turned fully now, facing her. His eyes were calm but sharp, the color of certainty. "No press conference, no speeches, no apologies written by committee. The truth already spoke for itself." Rachel frowned slightly. "Sir, with respect, silence might be misinterpreted as arrogance." He walked toward his desk, the sound of his shoes soft against the floor. "Let them misinterpret. Every person watching that video saw the same thing, how quickly power shifts when truth stands up." He picked up a glass of water from the table, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "If I explain it now, I turn a lesson into a performance. The moment will lose its weight." Rachel lowered her gaze. She had worked for him long enough to know that his restraint was not pride, it was precision. The phone on her tablet buzzed again. She glanced down. "Sir, Nicole Lawson has issued a statement." Marcus looked at her. "Let me hear it." Rachel read from the screen. She says, and I quote, "I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Reed, to my colleagues, and to every person who has ever been made to feel small by ignorance disguised as humor. I failed the uniform I wear and the people it represents." She looked up, her voice softer now. "It is sincere." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let it stand." Rachel hesitated. "Do you want to respond?" "No," he said. "Her words do not need validation. They need memory." Outside, a small plane crossed the skyline, its white trail cutting a perfect line through the blue. Marcus watched it for a moment. "You see that?" he said quietly. "Every flight leaves a mark, even after it disappears. That is what accountability should be." Rachel followed his gaze. "People are calling you a hero." He turned from the window. "Heroes end stories. I start them." He walked toward the conference table where a team of advisors had gathered: legal, communications, operations. They stood as he approached, each one unsure whether to speak first. "Sit," Marcus said simply. They obeyed. He looked at each of them one by one. "You all know why we are here. What happened on Flight 326 was not an incident, it was a revelation. You cannot train empathy into people who do not see others as equals. But you can build systems that make it impossible to hide behind procedure." The head of human resources, a woman named Teresa, cleared her throat. "We are revising the diversity protocols, sir. Mandatory workshops, bias assessments, and internal reviews." Marcus shook his head. "Workshops are theater. I want transformation." Teresa frowned. "And what does that look like?" He leaned forward slightly. "It looks like power redistributed. It looks like accountability written into pay scales. It looks like voices like Claire's being promoted instead of silenced." The room went still. He let the silence stretch before continuing. "Every company says it values equality. That is branding. I want justice as policy. If this airline is going to carry people above the world, then we are going to treat them like they belong to it." Rachel watched him speak, her eyes bright with something between admiration and disbelief. It was one thing to survive humiliation. It was another to weaponize it into progress. Teresa nodded slowly. "Understood, sir. We will make the adjustments immediately." Marcus straightened, his tone softer now. "Do not make them for me. Make them for every employee who does not have the power to sit in this room." He walked back toward the window. "Because if the sky belongs to everyone, then so does respect." The advisors sat in thoughtful silence. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, washing the city in light that seemed cleaner somehow. After the meeting, Rachel lingered behind as the others left. "Sir," she said quietly, "the world is watching you. You could use this moment to reshape not just Skyline Air, but every company that claims to stand for equality. Are you ready for that?" Marcus turned to her, his expression calm but resolute. "I have been ready since the first time someone told me I did not belong in a room I built." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when respect turns into belief. "Then the world had better be ready too." He nodded, picking up his phone from the table. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications, news alerts, emails, social media mentions. He scrolled through none of them. Instead, he opened a new message and began to type. To all employees. Subject, Flight 326. He wrote only one line. "Let this be the day we stop reacting to injustice and start designing against it." He hit send. The message shot through the company's servers, reaching thousands of inboxes within seconds. In offices, on tablets, in break rooms, and in cockpits across the world, people read it in silence. Outside, another plane rose into the morning air, its engines steady, its path certain. And for the first time since the night before, Marcus Elijah Reed allowed himself to close his eyes and breathe not in relief, but in renewal. Because justice, like flight, is not about staying above the clouds. It is about what you choose to carry when you come back down. By noon, the world had turned its full attention to him. Every major network carried the story of the flight. Every newspaper splashed his name across their front pages. Talk shows debated whether Marcus Elijah Reed was a visionary or a man too harsh for public sympathy. Hashtags trended, interviews replayed, think pieces multiplied. But in his office at Skyline Air, Marcus ignored the noise. His blinds were open, and sunlight poured in over stacks of files and glowing screens. The city stretched below him, restless, electric, alive with opinions. Yet his focus was fixed on a single folder on the table, one labeled Internal Ethics Reform. Rachel Harris stood near the doorway, tablet in hand, a faint tension in her shoulders. "It is chaos out there," she said. "Everyone wants a comment. News anchors, reporters, even government officials. They are calling you the Silent Sky CEO." Marcus did not look up from the folder. "Let them call me whatever helps them listen." Rachel hesitated. "Some people think your silence is arrogance." He closed the folder and finally looked at her. "It is not arrogance, it is accuracy. People always confuse quiet with guilt because they are afraid of what it reveals about them." She exhaled, sitting across from him. "You know, the board is nervous. They think your message to the employees was too raw." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Good. Comfort is the enemy of change." Rachel smiled faintly. "You sound like your mother again." He allowed a brief, soft laugh. "She would have loved that flight. She spent her life teaching me that dignity is the one thing they cannot revoke, no matter the setting." Rachel's expression softened. "Do you ever think she would be proud of what you have built?" Marcus turned his gaze toward the window. Pride was never her language. She believed in usefulness. "If my work is useful to someone who comes after me, then yes, she would be proud." The intercom buzzed lightly. Marcus pressed the button. "Yes?" His assistant's voice came through, careful and polite. "Sir, Claire Williams is here. She says she was asked to report to you in person." Marcus glanced at Rachel. "Send her in." The door opened, and Claire stepped inside, nervous but composed. Her uniform was immaculate, but her eyes carried the weight of everything she had seen. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "thank you for seeing me." Marcus gestured for her to sit. "Courage deserves time. Sit down, Claire." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair, unsure how close was too close. "Sir, I do not know what to say. Everything that has happened—" He interrupted gently. "You already said what mattered when you told the truth." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "They said I might lose my job for breaking rank." "Not here," Marcus said. "Here, you are being promoted." Her eyes widened. "Promoted?" He nodded. "To training and ethics liaison. You will help redesign our cabin conduct program. No more silence, no more fear. You will teach what courage sounds like." Claire blinked fast, trying to process the words. "Sir, I do not know what to say." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then say nothing. Let your work speak instead." Rachel watched the exchange quietly. There was something deeply human in the way Marcus spoke, not performative, not corporate. Just truth, simple and unshaken. Claire hesitated, then asked, "And what about Miss Lawson?" Marcus's expression did not harden, but his voice dropped an octave. "She is meeting with human resources now. Her future depends on how she listens, not how she apologizes." Claire nodded slowly. "I understand." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. "Do you know why I created Skyline Air, Claire?" She shook her head. "I wanted to build something that forced the world to sit next to itself," he said. "People from different lives, different stories, sharing the same sky for a few hours. I thought that proximity would create empathy." He paused, the faintest shadow crossing his face. "I was wrong. Proximity does not create empathy, consequence does." The words hit the room like quiet thunder. Rachel looked down at her tablet, pretending to read while hiding the goosebumps on her arms. Claire just sat still, absorbing every syllable. Marcus continued, softer now. "Do not lose your heart, Claire. The system needs people like you more than it needs people like me. I can build the plane, but you are the one who teaches it to fly straight." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I will not let you down." "I know," he said. "Now go home and rest. Tomorrow, you begin writing new rules." Claire stood, saluted quietly out of instinct, then smiled through her tears before leaving the room. When the door closed, Rachel turned to Marcus. "You just changed that woman's entire life." He sighed softly. "She changed her own. I just gave her a place to land." They both sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Rachel spoke first. "Sir, there is one more thing. A journalist from The Atlantic has requested a private interview. He says he wants to discuss the psychology of dignity. His words, not mine." Marcus smiled faintly. "If he understands dignity enough to use that word, I will give him 10 minutes. Rachel nodded, making a note on her tablet. "I will schedule it for next week." As she stood to leave, Marcus spoke again. "Rachel, Do you believe people are capable of permanent change? She turned, thoughtful. I believe pain teaches faster than comfort. But yes, I do. He nodded once, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Then maybe that flight was not punishment. Maybe it was education. Rachel smiled softly. Education always costs something. He looked back at her. So does ignorance. When she left, the office fell into stillness again. The sunlight had shifted, painting long golden lines across the floor. Marcus walked back to the window, hands in his pockets, watching another Skyline Airjet rise into the distance. It glittered briefly in the sun before disappearing into the clouds. He thought about how every plane, no matter how high it climbs, must eventually return to Earth. And maybe, he thought, that was the point of it all. Success, justice, dignity they were, not destinations. They were descents, reminders that what truly mattered was not who soared, but how one landed. In that quiet, Marcus Elijah Reed smiled to himself and whispered under his breath, 5 minutes. Because in 5 minutes, a single act of courage had changed everything. And now, the sky finally remembered who built it. The sun had already begun to lean west, spilling amber light across the marble floors of the Skyline Air Executive Tower. The day that had begun in uproar was softening into something quieter, but the weight of it lingered like the aftertaste of a long storm. Marcus Elijah Reed stood by the window again, sleeves rolled up, the city glimmering beneath him like 1,000 restless thoughts. He had not slept since the flight. He had not needed to. Clarity was its own kind of energy, and today, clarity was burning through him like fuel. Rachel Harris entered the office without knocking. She carried another tablet under her arm, its screen already alive with notifications. "Sir," she said gently, "the board is assembled in the conference room. They are waiting for you." Marcus nodded, still watching the skyline. "Do they seem ready to listen or just ready to talk?" Rachel hesitated. "A bit of both, I think." Then let us see which half wins," he said, turning toward the door. They walked together down the hallway, the rhythm of their steps echoing against the polished walls. Employees they passed lowered their voices, some nodding respectfully, others staring with a kind of silent reverence. News of his stance had spread beyond the company. Now it was being discussed in universities, think tanks, and morning shows. People were calling it the flight that changed the sky. When Marcus entered the boardroom, every executive stood. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of admiration and unease. These were powerful men and women, but power looked different in his presence, measured, almost shy. He motioned for them to sit. "Let us not pretend civility makes courage unnecessary. We have work to do." They obeyed, settling into their seats. Rachel took her place at his right side, a quiet force of balance amid the tension. Marcus remained standing. His tone was calm, but it carried weight. "Before we begin, let me make something clear. What happened on Flight 326 is not an embarrassment. It is a revelation. It showed us exactly where the line between policy and humanity breaks." The chief operations officer cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mr. Reed, the optics are still damaging. Stock fluctuations, media scrutiny, shareholders are nervous." Marcus turned to him slowly. "You are worried about volatility? Good. Maybe the market needed to remember that profit without principle is just polished decay." A few board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. He continued, pacing slightly. "I have spent 20 years building this company on the belief that excellence and equality can coexist. Yet one moment of unchecked arrogance in first class reminded us that systems without empathy are just cages with better lighting." The room went quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to hush. Rachel spoke up softly. "Mr. Reed, if I may, what do you propose?" Marcus stopped pacing and rested his hands on the table. "We rebuild our training, not as a box to check, but as a mirror to face. I want every employee, from the flight deck to the boardroom, to understand that authority means responsibility, not superiority." The chief financial officer frowned slightly. "That kind of overhaul will be expensive." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "So is ignorance." The CFO looked down, chastened. Marcus turned to Rachel. "Prepare a program called Elevation. It will replace every outdated policy on conduct, diversity, and ethics. No scripts, no corporate jargon, just conversations real, unfiltered, mandatory. I want every manager to hear stories from the people they serve." Rachel nodded, already typing. "And the implementation timeline?" 60 days, Marcus said. No delays, no excuses. If we can get a plane off the ground in 20 minutes, we can change a company in 60 days. A faint ripple of approval spread across the table, quiet but visible. The head of communications spoke next. And what about your public statement? The press still expects one. Marcus smiled faintly. The statement has already been made. It happened 30,000 feet above the ground. I do not need to repeat it. She hesitated. Then how do we control the narrative? You do not control truth, Marcus said. You honor it. Let the footage speak. Let people argue. Let them feel uncomfortable. Change does not need choreography. The board fell silent again. He let that silence breathe, not as a pause, but as a lesson. Finally, he said, I built Skyline Air to represent what freedom should look like: movement without hierarchy. But freedom without respect is chaos, and respect without accountability is theater. We will have neither. We will have dignity. Rachel watched him closely. Every word was measured, but none rehearsed. He spoke like a man unafraid of being misunderstood, because truth does not need translation. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out quietly, each lost in thought. Only Rachel remained. She closed her tablet and looked at him. You know, you could have made this easier on yourself, she said softly. A few gentle words, a polished apology, and this would have been over. Marcus smiled slightly. Easier is what broke the world in the first place. She laughed under her breath. You really are relentless. He shrugged lightly. Relentless is what justice looks like when it stops asking for permission. Rachel stood, tucking her tablet under her arm. The press will keep following you. This story is not going away. I do not want it to, Marcus replied. Let it stay. Let it haunt us until we no longer need stories like it. She nodded, her voice softer now. You know there are people calling you the conscience of corporate America. Marcus turned toward the window, his silhouette framed by the glow of sunset. Then maybe it is time corporate America learned to feel again. The city below shimmered in gold and copper light. Cars moved like threads of silver, and far in the distance, another Skyline Airjet rose into the horizon, ascending clean and sure. Marcus watched it climb higher until it disappeared into the fading blue. He whispered to himself, just loud enough for Rachel to hear, "Every flight is a second chance if you know how to land." Rachel smiled softly. And if not? He looked at her, eyes calm and unwavering. Then you learn. You always learn. Outside, the last of the sunlight slipped below the skyline, leaving only reflection in its place. Inside, Marcus Elijah Reed turned from the window and began walking toward his office door, his steps unhurried, his purpose unshaken. Because some men chase power to rise. Others rise to remind the world that power, without conscience, is just altitude, without direction. And Marcus had never once flown without knowing where he was going. The cabin was still trembling when Marcus Elijah Reed spoke again, his voice calm against the hum of the engines. Nicole stood frozen near the galley, her face pale beneath the harsh cabin light. The wrong meal still sat untouched before him, a symbol heavier than any insult. You think class is determined by fabric and color, he said quietly, but it is measured by conduct. The laughter that had filled the aisle minutes earlier was gone. The men in suits who had mocked him now stared at their plates, shame creeping up their necks. Even the air felt thinner. Nicole tried to speak. Sir, Marcus raised a hand. You were eager to remind me where you thought I belonged. Let me return the favor. This plane belongs to me. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The captain opened the cockpit door slightly, uncertain. Mr. Reed? Sir? Marcus's tone did not waver. Continue the flight. Everything is fine. We are simply adjusting altitude. Nicole's knees almost buckled. You mean this airline? Yes, Marcus said, and today it will learn what respect costs. He turned to the passengers. You all watched. You laughed. Not because it was funny, but because you felt safe doing it. Prejudice survives on witnesses. No one spoke. The aircraft leveled again, the turbulence gone. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly calm, indifferent, equal. Inside, truth finally had gravity. Marcus leaned back, voice steady as judgment. Remember this moment the next time you measure worth by sight. You might be standing in someone else's empire and not even know it. The week after the incident, Skyline Air began to feel different not just in structure, but in spirit. The employees moved through the halls with a new awareness, a quiet recalibration of how they looked at one another. Posters of the Elevation Initiative appeared in every break room, every gate office, every crew lounge. The slogan was simple: respect is not a service, it is a standard. Ugh. Marcus Elijah Reed spent those days not in interviews, but in observation. He walked the hangars, visited call centers, and sat quietly in employee meetings without cameras or press. He listened more than he spoke. The world might have crowned him a hero, but he had no interest in crowns. Heroes end stories. Leaders begin repairs. One afternoon, he visited a training facility near Long Beach, where a group of new flight attendants sat in a classroom learning emergency protocol. The instructor paused mid-sentence when he entered. Whispers rippled through the room. Marcus gave a small nod. Please, continue. After the session, one of the trainees, a young man with dark curls and a nervous smile, approached him. Mr. Reed, sir, he said carefully, I watched the video. Everyone in my family did. It made me want to work here. Marcus smiled faintly. And what did you learn from it? The young man hesitated. That silence is expensive. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, silence always sends the bill to someone else. He walked with the group for a few minutes afterward, answering questions about leadership and ethics. When one trainee asked how he stayed so calm on the plane, Marcus replied, because anger burns too quickly. Calmness lasts long enough to finish the work. That night, back at headquarters, Rachel Harris entered his office with a soft knock. Sir, it is official, she said. Applications for Skyline's internal mentorship program have doubled since the Elevation rollout. People want to learn. Marcus looked up from his notes, his tone even. Then we are finally teaching. She smiled. Also, The Atlantic has published their piece. The headline reads, The Man Who Fired Silence. Marcus gave a quiet laugh. Catchy. Rachel sat across from him. You know, most CEOs would have turned that flight into a press tour. I am not most CEOs, he said simply. She studied him for a moment. Do you ever wonder why this moment found you? Marcus looked toward the window, where the reflection of the skyline glowed against the night. Because truth needed someone who would not flinch. Rachel nodded, her voice soft. And now the world listens differently. He shook his head. No, Rachel. The world remembers differently. Listening fades. Memory changes behavior. Outside, a plane rose into the dark sky, its lights blinking like a pulse of resolve. Marcus watched it ascend until it vanished among the stars. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, Let them keep watching the skies. Every time one of our planes takes off, I want them to remember that justice has wings. The following month arrived like a calm after the storm, steady, reflective, full of rebuilding. Skyline Air's headquarters buzzed with new energy. What once felt like routine now felt purposeful. The company's internal culture was transforming faster than anyone could have predicted. Employees who had never spoken in meetings were now leading discussions. Ground staff who once felt invisible were being invited to feedback sessions. The Elevation program had become more than a policy, it was a movement. And everywhere Marcus Elijah Reed went, people stood a little taller, not out of fear, but out of pride. That morning, he arrived at the company's central training hub for the official launch of the Elevation curriculum. Reporters lined the edges of the hangar, cameras ready, but Marcus had made one thing clear. No press statements, no applause, no performance, only presence. He walked to the front of the hall, dressed simply in a black suit with no tie. Hundreds of employees, pilots, attendants, engineers, executives stood in quiet anticipation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried with effortless gravity. Every company has a mission statement, he began. Ours used to talk about safety, comfort, and service. But today, we add one more word, conscience. The room was still, the kind of stillness that does not ask for clapping, only understanding. Flight 326 was not a scandal, Marcus continued. It was a mirror. It showed us who we had become when we stopped paying attention. But the beauty of truth is that it gives you the power to change without asking for permission. He paused, scanning the crowd. Faces of every color, every rank, every background looked back at him. Every one of you, he said, is a part of this sky. Whether you clean the cabin or design the engines, whether you serve champagne or fly the jet, you are the face of what comes next. Dignity does not wear uniforms, it wears behavior. There was a quiet murmur of agreement. A few people nodded, some wiped tears discreetly. Marcus smiled faintly. When I founded Skyline Air, I wanted to build more than an airline. I wanted to build altitude, not the kind that lifts planes, but the kind that lifts people. You cannot buy that. You have to become it. He looked toward the back, where Claire Williams stood among the new recruits. She caught his gaze and smiled, a small, knowing smile that said everything. Marcus concluded, "From this day forward, we do not fly above others. We rise together, because the sky is not owned, it is shared." The audience did not cheer. They stood in silence, united by something deeper than applause. Outside, a jet soared overhead, its engines roaring like a heartbeat. Marcus glanced up at the sound and said softly, "That is what progress sounds like." That evening, long after the crowd had left the hangar and the last light of day had faded behind the skyline, Marcus Elijah Reed stood alone on the observation deck of Skyline Air headquarters. The runway below glowed with lines of gold, planes taxiing and rising into the night like stars being born. The city beyond hummed softly, alive yet distant. For the first time in weeks, the world was quiet again. Not silent, just calm. The kind of calm that follows understanding. The storm had passed, but its lesson lingered in the air. Marcus rested his hands on the railing, looking toward the horizon. Every takeoff, every ascending light reminded him why he began all of this. Power, he thought, had never been about domination. It was about direction, about using altitude not to rise above people, but to lift them with you. Behind him, the door opened softly. Rachel Harris stepped out, her voice low. "You are still here." Marcus smiled faintly. "Someone has to make sure the sky knows it is being used properly." Rachel walked to his side, gazing out over the runways. "You realize you changed an entire industry in 1 month?" He shook his head gently. "No, the world changed itself. I just reminded it what decency looks like when it refuses to whisper." She studied his profile for a moment, the calm, the steadiness, the kind of authority that did not need to prove itself. "There will be other storms," she said quietly. "Other moments like that flight." "I hope so," he replied, "because storms show us where we still need repair." They stood together in silence, watching one more Skyline jet lift into the air. The sound of its engines filled the space between them, deep and steady. Rachel asked softly, "Do you ever miss anonymity? Flying without anyone knowing who you are?" Marcus chuckled under his breath. "Anonymity is peace, but visibility is purpose. You cannot heal the world from the shadows." "Oh," he turned to her then, his tone softer. "You know, Rachel, that day on Flight 326, it was never about revenge. It was about revelation. They thought they were serving a man. They were serving a lesson." Rachel smiled faintly. "And the lesson landed." Marcus looked back at the sky. "Not yet. Landing is just the beginning." Down below, the plane they had been watching disappeared into the clouds, its lights fading into distance. The air shimmered faintly, reflecting the city's glow. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Justice is not loud," he said. "It is steady. It takes its time, but it always arrives right on schedule." He turned toward the glass doors, pausing for one last look at the sky that had carried both his humiliation and his triumph. The same sky, unchanged, indifferent, infinite. Then, with a calm dignity that no camera could capture, Marcus Elijah Reed walked back inside. Outside, the night continued to rise quiet, boundless, and finally free.